Hey everyone, welcome into another episode of Planet Coaster, and today is a special episode, and that's because I was recently asked to be a part of the BroCoaster series, and if you're watching this, I'm assuming you probably know what that is, but if not, it's a series by two other YouTubers called Maskedbandit and N7, and it's a park that is really unique to the community, at least on YouTube, I would say. And it's unique because it's incredibly realistic. It's not necessarily sort of big and over the top, flashy, even like my Paris park where, in reality, a park like that probably would never exist because of the financial ramifications. And that's one aspect of the series that they really focus on, is being concerned about the cost of things. So given the specific time period that certain rides were built, certain areas of the park were built, what would the budget have been like? What were the finances of the park? What was the time period? So all of those things are taken into consideration when it comes to design and layout. And it's really a fun way to build, honestly. It's something that definitely got me outside of my comfort zone, but it was something that I actually learned a lot from, because it completely changes the way that you go about building something. Instead of just simply building it to maybe make it look 100% the way you would want to, you really have to show restraint in the design that you're using. And that's actually, again, something that I learned a lot in this whole process, and will continue to sort of implement and try to use going forward. Not necessarily in my Paris project. That's something that I do intend on finishing, so hang with me on that. I just sort of need a break creatively from it. But when I do get back into it, that's something that I'm going to spare no expense. I'm going to make it as detailed as I can and as I want it to be. But something in Jubilee Gardens that the lessons I've learned from this process is something that I'm definitely going to implement and really try to work on, because in my time in NoNameLandia, which, quick sidebar, you're probably noticing that I'm on a blank map right now, and that's because I was having some problems with the advanced move tool. So what I ended up doing was just copying the coaster as a blueprint and did the work in a blank park. That way I could have a little bit easier control over what I was doing. So in a few minutes here, we'll get back into the park. You'll see me upload the blueprint back into NoNameLandia, and we'll work from there. But during my time in the park, it's really amazing. I spent a lot of time just walking around in the Tegged Cam, and there's just so much little detail that makes it feel so realistic, and it's not overtly fancy. I think that's something that I got caught in at times, where in my own mind, it was like the fancier and more detailed it is, the more realistic it is, and that's not always the case. It's something that I actually talked quite a bit about with the two bros and during this whole process, is the idea of design and being selective. So, not just putting in a bunch of stuff and a bunch of detail for the sake of detail, but showing restraint. Because lack of detail, or lack of objects, I should say, can also be a type of detail. So, and I think Silverette kind of touched on that in his most recent episode of God, I'm spacing on it. It's grapefruit. Sorry, I was going to say some other random fruit, but he touched on it, where he talked about, the area around his coaster he made kind of barren, like, almost as if it was newly built. And that's an example where, instead of just going in and sort of spamming the whole area with trees and bushes, he made an intentional design decision to limit the amount of detail based on how new the ride was, or things like that. And that's very much the case of what they do in the BroCoaster series as well. So just thinking in that way and adjusting my mindset was honestly a real challenge for me. And it I feel like as a creator during this whole process, I definitely grew and definitely learned a ton. So that's something, like I said, I probably won't restrain myself to when it comes to the Paris park, but I definitely will start to implement in my time in Jubilee Gardens. And it's something that I think Commando Santa and I tried to touch on in the last episode. I don't think we had fully formed our thought on it yet, but I think we're getting there. So anyway, I should probably actually talk about what I'm doing here. So the whole area that I was building in was for the Invert, and they had already done quite a bit of work in this sort of queue area, and the basis for the theme of this particular area was that it was supposed to be sort of like an arboretum. And so the station itself, the sort of direction I was given from the two guys was that I should, something should be looking like a conservatory or something like that you would find in a botanical gardens or an arboretum or something like that. So that was the main inspiration that I got, and this was an interesting process too, and just not only from the standpoint of building sort of outside of my comfort zone, but just knowing how I feel about my own work, and if I have a vision for something, I want it done a certain way. And so with that in mind, I tried to be very conscientious of their vision for the park and what they wanted to see in the park. So I did check in with them quite a bit and just sort of give progress along the way, make sure that I was at least touching on what they were hoping for and wanting. And one of the decisions that I went back and forth on, and it was definitely the right call to do this. You see it now, I have the windows as the roof. So before I was using the simple art shapes to give it sort of the same metal roof that you see on the dome structure. And it just was bland. And once I finished the windows, it really gave it that look of a conservatory, and I think it really is what makes the station in the end, honestly. So so I was really wanted to make sure that their vision was being captured of what they wanted the park to be. At the same time, I still wanted to leave my mark as well. So I think I accomplished that. Obviously, this is not as detailed as maybe I've done in the past and for different buildings, but it's definitely probably the most realistic building I've made from a theme park standpoint. Like all of my stuff in Paris Park, all of that is incredibly realistic from a real life standpoint. But in terms of a theme park, I think this is probably my most realistic building to date, including the stuff in Jubilee Gardens. I mean, maybe the entrance building, but in terms of what you would realistically see in a theme park, I really feel like I captured this. And one of the things that I wanted to do to ensure that was I wanted to be very open and airy. A lot of times, based on how I'm designing, I have to completely enclose the building because I'm putting so much detail in that those pieces if you go on the inside, they're all sticking out. And so that's something that I really didn't want to do here. I wanted to make sure that the station itself really felt open and airy like it would in real life, like it would in a real park. And that's because most stations in a theme park aren't typically designed to be an enclosure. They're designed to be is a covering. And so that was also something that I wanted to capture, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Some of the stuff that you won't see on screen that I did off screen is I really went in after I had this sort of base structure. I went in and I tried to add more detail and more supports to make it feel like it was actually structurally sound, like that it was actually something that could stand up. Because right now, the way it looks, the dome in particular, it just looks like it doesn't have the proper amount of support that it would fall over. And so one thing I did to mitigate that is, you can see the beginnings of it here, is I actually closed in the gable at the top. So that does end up getting closed in off camera, which really helped give that top part some more mass and didn't make it feel like it was gonna sort of topple over or topple inward, I should say. And then another thing I did was I added some horizontal supports all the way across the interior of the station, and then vertical supports from those to sort of fill in the gaps. And in the end result, I think it really does look like something that was properly engineered. I'm sure if you're an actual engineer, you could poke tons of holes in it, but at least to the layman, I feel pretty happy with how it turned out. So there's not a completely finished look at it, and there will be some cinematics at the end here, but for the most part, I want to leave the total reveal for the next Bro Coaster episode. So for the coaster building and for this building that we're looking at right now, you won't see the entire process. And I went back and forth on whether or not to include this particular structure. So, because for a couple reasons. One, right now I'm using the stone and I end up completely switching to brick. And so basically you're about to watch a lot of stuff that doesn't end up actually being in the finished product. So if you want to skip ahead to the cinematics, I don't blame you at all. But the reason I kept it in there is because normally I edit all that stuff out, but I think it's valuable to see from the standpoint that, you know, a lot of times the finished product or even the time lapses that you're watching is not even half the story that goes into building something. So a lot of times I'll get pretty far into something and it just doesn't look right, it just doesn't feel right, and so I'll end up redoing parts of it or reworking parts of it. And that's exactly what happened with this station for the car ride. The inspiration for this that they gave me was American Belle Epoque, or, you know, the golden age, or gilded age in American architecture. And so it's going to have a lot of similar elements that you might find in European Belle Epoque, in particular, like the mansard roofs and things like that. And so that's obviously in my wheelhouse, and I was really happy to do this, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. But when I was in the process of doing this, again, I got pretty much almost done, at least with the base structure, and it just didn't feel right, and you'll see that in a minute here. And one of the reasons that I switched from this stone to the brick, even though stone probably makes more sense from an actual material standpoint for that time period, I switched to the brick just because scaling things down like this and really making it not feel like it overpowers the area around it, the stones themselves almost felt too big. And so by switching to brick, it really helped minimize that effect, I think. And the end result is, in my opinion, looks much better. So that's one thing that I ended up changing. The other here, you'll see I sort of set the basis for a little bit of a tower on the exit. And again, it just felt way too big. So that's something you'll see me tweak in a minute here. But again, another thing that I wanted to do was keep it relatively open, just like the coaster station. And that's sort of a common theme, you know, around NoNameLandia. I know that they intend at some point to, once it's all done, they'll have a big release, you know, of the park on the workshop and all that stuff, the finished product. And when that happens, I hope that everyone watching this video goes and downloads it, because and when you do that, just get in the Tegged Cam and walk around the park like you're an actual guest, because it is incredible. There's so many little things, so many little pieces of detail and attention to detail, whether it be like I just talked about earlier in the video, whether it be intentionally leaving detail out or intentionally adding detail in, whether it's subtle terrain changes, whether it's blemishes that are intentional, or even like the sound, you know, the atmosphere that sound creates. So they've intentionally placed speakers throughout the park that have different, you know, little songs. Like there's like piano playing in one area, there's sort of the harmonica playing over in sort of not the western area, but like where the log flume is, and things like that. And it truly, especially once you have peeps in the park, it truly feels like it comes alive. And so when that time comes, I highly encourage all of you to go and download the park and just enjoy it. It would be amazing if there was some sort of feature, like a multiplayer feature, where you could all, like, you could go to a park with your character. That would be amazing, but because this park was like made for that. But anyway, that's a random sidebar. But yeah, so I guess I'll finish talking about the structure here. So again, if you look at the sort of tower that's on the exit, you know, I don't think it looks bad necessarily. It just looks too big. And especially when you sort of got down at peep level, it really felt like the mass of the structure was way too big for the area. And so what I ended up doing is slimming it down by using some non-grid pieces as for walls. So, and another thing that you know, I talking about budget earlier in the episode here, the dormers on there, I sent them a picture and they were like, yeah, that's too fancy. Like we don't have the budget for that. So that's something that I ended up taking off as well. You know, and that's an example of, like I talked about, where I really had to think in a way that was different from the way I normally build, because so much of how I normally build, I just want to make it look as nice as I think it should look. And like, to me, I think the dormers look better with the dormers, but when you factor in budget, it you know, I think it was Mike who said it was like, yeah, that's too fancy, like we don't have the budget for that. And it makes sense, like that would cost more money. And from a design standpoint, that's probably, like, this happens in real life all the time with architects. So often you see, you know, one thing that I keep track of a lot is like skyscraperpage.com. So you can go on there, and most cities have forums that talk about new developments and things like that. And so that's something that I frequent pretty regularly. And it's always funny to see the very first concept art come out for a building, because the end result looks nothing like it. And so similar premise here. It's like, if I was the architect, I would have had those dormers in there, but you know, when it comes down to actually making the thing a reality, like, stuff's going to start hitting the chopping block, and it's going to start getting cut. And chances are something like that is going to be the first thing out the door if there starts to be budget constraints. And that's, like I said, the same thing happens in real life all the time. So yeah, here you see sort of the final results coming together of that decision I made. And I left the main sort of larger tower off to the side, because in case I didn't like it, I didn't want to have to go back and redo all that work. But it also benefited to have it there from the standpoint of really seeing the contrast between the two. And I think even in that sort of last shot there, you can already see that it looks better, that it fits in better with the area. It's not so overpowering. It doesn't block so much of the view. Like, that's another aspect of design that, you know, you can tell is so intentional about this park, is preserving certain views, preserving certain vistas. And as you're walking down this main path area, you can really see that the way it's laid out, it was intentional, and they left a certain viewpoint open, and the other tower, the larger one, started to really impede on that, I think. And so this skinnier tower, I think, really made a huge difference and tied into the area without obstructing, you know, what had already been done. So yeah, I think most of it's just pretty much detail work here. I mean, this is a building technique that I used a lot on the Jubilee Gardens Main Street, with custom shingles and all that stuff. And again, it's just because there's not, you know, in-game pieces to do it. And yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's obviously, like I said, it's something in my wheelhouse. And you'll see me redo that last bit there. I had the game quit on me. So I ended up redoing that. You'll see that twice in the time lapse. But yeah, I don't really know what else to talk about. I'm really, really thankful that I got to be a part of the project. It's an amazing, amazing park. I know that they've already talked about season 2, and I can't wait to see what they do there. There's still obviously plenty of work to do in the park now, but it was truly an honor to be a part of it. You know, it was a blast. So I'm actually, I think, almost out of time lapse here. There will be some cinematics at the end, and definitely stay tuned for the next episode of BroCoaster. It'll be episode 26. I'll include links to both of their pages in the description. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. And again, the next episode of Jubilee Gardens will be up on Commando Santa's page. We're probably going to be delayed about a week there because of some travel. So stay with us there. We should have a new episode up shortly. And yeah, we'll see you guys over on his channel. Thanks for watching.